Hello everyone, I am Ladin Gürdal. I'm a master's student, social psychology master's student at Sabancı University. And I work as a research assistant in a project where we examine antecedents and consequences of child rearing practices in Turkey. So here I'll be presenting the roles of socialization goals on parental psychological and behavioral control in Turkey based on the data that we gathered for this larger project. So before I start, I want to give you a brief overview about the topic. Parental ethnotheories refer to the cultural belief systems that parents hold about the nature of children, development, parenting, and the family. And these ethnotheories act as a mediator between cultural models, for instance, individualism and collectivism, and parenting behaviors. Parents' descriptions of socialization goals are highly informative of the child rearing values held by a culture, reflecting their orientation to the cultural model. So parenting ethnotheories, including parenting socialization goals and beliefs about children's traits and characteristics, shape parent-child rearing behaviors. To better explain with an example, we can think that a family prioritizes acting morally over other socialization goals, and another family prioritizing independence as a socialization goal, as the main socialization goal that was prioritized. So here we can think that for a child to act morally, parents might be using more psychological control and culture-specific behavioral control strategies to achieve their goal. And for the independence, other strategies might be more useful to achieve the goal. And here I want to highlight an important point that these groups are not mutually exclusive. So there are parents who want their child to act morally and be independent at the same time. So that's why we're not going to use individualism, collectivism spectrum in the study, but rather we will use Çiğdem Kağıtçıbaşı's autonomy relatedness and autonomy relatedness groups. So the present study aims to examine how socialization goals that Turkish parents hold regarding their children influence their parenting behaviors. We aim to examine how implicitly assessed family types based on parenting socialization goals are associated with parents' psychological and behavioral control practices. So we expect parents from relational and cultural family types use more psychological control and cultural forms of behavioral control. In our measures, I'll be explaining what I mean by cultural forms of behavioral control. And we expect parents from autonomous family types to use more specific forms of behavioral control. For instance, child disclosure, encouraging child's disclosure. So our participants and our measures. This study was funded by the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, and a large data from a large parent group was gathered. However, in this specific study, we used the data from 363 parents, 463 parents, and 310 mothers and 155 fathers. They reported on equal number of boys and girls, actually, 232 boys and 231 girls. And the child age ranged from 3 to 18 years old. And these parents completed 3 main measures. First of them is socialization goals. Here there was a list developed by our research team based on the results of the qualitative phase of the study. We suggested 18 items, and parents were asked to choose the 5 most important ones. For instance, humble, independent, expresses likes and dislikes. For psychological control, we had 16 items. For instance, I try to change how my child feels or thinks about things. Here we used a mixture of Barber's psychological control scale and the items derived from the qualitative inquiry. For behavioral control, we had 3 subheadings. One of them is child disclosure with 4 items. For instance, my child usually tells me about school, how each subject is going, his or her relationship with teachers. For indirect control, we had 6 items. For instance, if necessary, I lie to my child to prevent acting stubborn. And for control for appropriate moral and religious behaviors, we had 7 items. For instance, when I see any wrongdoing, I say it's shameful. So the letter 2.1, indirect control and control for appropriate moral religious behaviors, reflects more culture-specific form of behavioral controls, whereas child disclosure is more universal type of behavioral control, which is prominent among cultures. So here is the list of our socialization goals, the first measure we developed. We grouped the items in 3 categories: autonomous, relational, and cultural. So maybe before I explain go over the items, maybe I can talk about Çiğdem Kağıtçıbaşı's model of autonomy and relatedness. So in that model, there are 3 prominent family types widely seen in Turkey. First of them is autonomous family type, which is prioritize autonomy over relatedness. So autonomy is high and relatedness is low, and the socialization goal can be self-reliance and self-oriented. In the relational family types, on the other hand, the opposite pattern is seen. So autonomy is low and relatedness is high. So the main socialization goals are coherence and obedience and other oriented goals. So the third family type is autonomy relatedness. So in that family type, we see both high levels of autonomy and high levels of relatedness. So obedience is important as well as self-reliance. So by using an emic approach, we extracted the most prominent socialization goals in Turkey by a qualitative inquiry and developed this quantitative survey. So we realized that besides autonomous and related items, we also found some culture-specific items that is not under the neither of the autonomy or relatedness scales. So in the autonomous one, we have goals such as self-confident, independent, can make own decisions. In the relational one, we had helpful sharing, get along with friends, share problem and joys with parents. And in cultural one, we had contented, respectful to elders, humble, cooperative. But still, we can see that in the cultural ones, we still see some related goals. For instance, respectful to elders, acting morally, being cooperative. These are, again, other-oriented and cooperativeness, like coherence-oriented goals. Therefore, in the grouping, relational and cultural were regarded as belonging in the same group. So what I mean by that is we, based on the parent reports, the 5 items they choose over the 18 items, we grouped parents into 3 categories. So if parents chose 3 or more autonomous group out of 5 items that they prioritize, they were categorized under the autonomous group. If they choose 2 autonomous and 2 from the relational or cultural, so there can be 3 combinations here, 3 relational, 1 cultural, 1 relational, or 2 cultural, along with the 2 autonomous. We said that they prioritize autonomy and relatedness in an equal way. So they belong to autonomous related group. And in the relational cultural group, they have to choose 3 cultural or relational items out of 5. It can be 3 combinations as well: 2 cultural, 1 relational, 1 cultural, 2 relational, or 3 relational, or 3 cultural. So 4 possibilities. And even though autonomy-related and relational cultural groups share some common items because of regarding related items and cultural items in the same category as a limitation, still 3 groups are mutually exclusive, so a parent cannot be in the relational cultural group as well as the autonomous related group, because the syntaxes were created in a mutually exclusive way. So I want to briefly present our results. To compare these 3 groups, we use ANCOVA by controlling gender, parent gender, and parental education. So when we compared the 3 groups, like we expected from our hypothesis, we saw that psychological control is significantly higher in the relational cultural group than the autonomous related group and then the autonomous group. So highest psychological control was seen in the relational cultural group. And for the control for appropriate moral and religious behaviors, we see that 3 groups significantly differed from each other. So mostly again in relational cultural group. And the same pattern was seen in the indirect control, relational cultural group with the highest level of indirect control and significantly differing from autonomous related group and autonomous group. However, in the child disclosure, when we did not control for education and gender, we found a significant difference between groups. So the opposite pattern, autonomous group, encourage child disclosure significantly more than autonomous related group and relational cultural group. However, when we controlled for the gender and education, we saw that the significance was disappeared. So here we can say that education and gender have more important interactions to explain child disclosure than the family types. So here we found 3 significant difference in 3 control strategies, but we couldn't find a significant difference in child disclosure when we controlled for education and gender. So to conclude, the 3 types of families were still common in Turkey. As you can see, we had equal number of groups and a number of parents approximately in each group. And the results contribute to a growing understanding of the ways in which socialization goals influence parenting behaviors. We can say that collectivistic relational families seem to endorse higher levels of psychological control and culturally rooted forms of behavioral control, such as using religious and moral control. Whereas the autonomous families endorse specific behavioral control practices, such as encouraging child disclosure. So we can say that there is a gap in literature to assess socialization goals and predict parenting practices based on socialization goals. We tried to fill this gap with our study, but future research might expand our knowledge about cultural antecedents of parenting behaviors by using different parenting practices and maybe developing better strategies to implicitly assess socialization goals. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Yes.